Hello, I'm Ross Worth. I've got a story to tell. The triple bottom line, a real-world example of using the triple bottom line in a meaningful way in a refinery, a crude oil refinery. This story really starts about 25 years ago. At that time, I was named gasoline product manager. The position product manager will be familiar to many in the packaged goods industry, but it's really not that normal to find a product manager position in an oil company. But this was an opportunity to really look at gasoline from beginning to end, from refinery to the consumer. A lot of it was operational planning, mainly alignment of the different parts of the organization. Some of it was very strategic, setting direction across the organization for a single product line. But most of the time was really troubleshooting, problem solving, handling the things that come up in a normal organization that keeps things from running smoothly and efficiently. As part of my training, I had an opportunity to spend a week at a refinery. My background as an undergraduate was in chemistry, followed by an MBA, so I knew a lot of the business side. I knew the chemistry involved in refining, but I really didn't have much familiarity with the engineering side. So I spent a week on site. Really, this was obviously a 24-hour operation, so in that 1 week period, I managed to work really all shifts in all parts of the refinery to really get a feel for what happened at the refinery. I labeled this fire, which interesting enough was the first thing I encountered when I showed up at the refinery. I had just checked in at the security gate. The call had been placed to my escort for that day, and immediately after that, the fire alarms went off. It doesn't take much to say that I didn't go anywhere. I was basically waiting to see what others were doing. If they were running, you could be sure I would be running with them. The building you see here really is an office building, and it was pointed out to me that all of the windows facing the refinery operating units were now effectively blast-proof windows, because a few years earlier a refinery blast had literally shattered all of that glass flying into the building. Luckily it was after hours, so those offices were vacant, but that kind of gives you an indication of the dangers involved. The unit you see circled here is the current refinery operations building that really replaced the one that was destroyed earlier. The outside walls all have slopes to them, so that when a concussion from a refinery blast would hit the wall would not take the full impact, but would divert a lot of that impact in an upward direction. Also, the building has positive pressure. That means the building is pressurized a little bit such that it would be able to further withstand a concussion from a blast. These were all enhancements made to the refinery operations control center after that major explosion. Be what it may, a refinery is a rather dangerous place, and this was a case where major modifications were made to the buildings themselves for the people's safety while running the operation. When I first got there, I mentioned that I was met with a fire. The fire itself actually took place in this area of pipelines and the valves. You have a series of pumps, maybe 50 yards one way, and then a whole series of interconnections that are valves that allow all the different pipelines to be organized in different flow patterns. When I was standing there listening to how the different product was pumped from one place to another, I heard over my right shoulder a pump start up, and right in front of me I saw a flow of gasoline, a literal flow of gasoline that came out of loose seals in the valve that were flowing into the ground. I could have easily taken a pail and filled up a gallon within a matter of 20-30 seconds. It was flowing that rapidly. So as you can see, you had volatile chemicals flowing into the ground It wouldn't take much for wind to pick up those vapors and really blow them toward the pump area, and all it would take would be a spark from a new pump starting up to start the fire, which is exactly what happened. The automatic controls at that time would have switched on a pump. At the same time, a gust of wind would have pushed volatile chemicals toward that pump, being really ignited by a spark. Obviously, in that case, you don't have a lot of danger. The fire pretty much flashes itself out, may burn a little bit at the ground, but it doesn't take much to put them out. But this was routine 25 years ago. One of the things that I had an opportunity to do was really see this operation in control. Here you see a little bit more of the intermediate product tanks, the finished product tanks, and one of the barges. I'd like to spend a little bit of time focusing on this particular dock area where there's an ocean-going barge being filled up. I spent one night working on a barge, really sitting around for the most part, but watching the operations. What's interesting is that we were filling the barge with turbine fuel. Turbine fuel in many ways is actually more dangerous than gasoline because the vapor pressure is lower. Gasoline quickly sets a concentrated set of vapors in the compartment, and really if you have over concentration of vapors, there's not enough of oxygen to sustain fire or an explosion. On the other hand, turbine fuel has a lower volatility such that it doesn't fill the vessel up as quick with the volatile vapors, leaving an explosive situation, and moving of the liquid through the pipelines can actually create static electricity similar to what you might experience walking across a wool carpet in the winter. That static electricity would be sufficient to really ignite the turbine fuel vapors within the compartment, which is exactly what happened not that many years before, which was another refinery incident where the barge blew up and really created a cascading effect that destroyed some of the nearby finished product tanks. To prevent that, a number of safety issues are in place. In this particular case, the barge was older and did not have a nitrogen suppression system in place, but instead we brought in dry ice, about a ton or two of dry ice that was manually carried, dropped into the hold of this vessel, and then we sat around for a couple hours waiting for the dry ice to effectively vaporize, filling the compartment with carbon dioxide, pushing out the oxygen. Once the compartment was CO2 flooded, then we started the operations of filling the tanks up with turbine fuel. This was an all-night operation, but as I sat there, I had an opportunity to reflect on what I had seen earlier that week. The incidents of fires, by that point I was toward the end of the week, and there had been 3 fires at that particular refinery when I was on site that week. I had an opportunity to see the environmental situation, which was accepted as normal at that time. Shortly after this, there was another incident, a fire, explosion, and in this case, a loss of life. An explosion and fire, loss of life. This was fairly traumatic for the vice president, who was new in his position. He had the duty and obligation to really meet the widow of the person who died in this explosion and explain to her what happened. That's hard to do. Very hard to do, and it made a lasting impression on him, an impression such that he would never want to do it again. He set in place something that had a lasting impact on the refinery, and it started with keep it safe. He wanted the refinery to be safe. But he also added keep it clean. and that it was important to keep the refinery clean. And thirdly, keep it running. Keep it safe, keep it clean, keep it running. This is effectively really the triple bottom line. Safety ties to the people. Clean was obviously the environment itself. And running, which is normal. You're trying to keep the equipment running. This also gave a prioritization. Okay. The prioritization put safety first, environmental second, and running. So it gave some prioritization as to the triple bottom line. But where do you focus? Safety obviously is the first priority, but you always say safety. Every operating unit, every manufacturing facility has a safety first, but it almost becomes background noise in that it is something that is always present but rarely seen. And you almost get lackadaisical because it just becomes wallpaper. Okay. Also, there's really an implicit focus to keep it running. This is where managers spend their time. An historical focus on safety with implicit focus on keeping it running or profitable. What was unique here was the refinery vice president really flipped things around and instead put the focus on keeping it clean. Where I saw gasoline running from bad seals in a valve was replaced. Where I saw rusty tanks, rusty pipes were cleaned and painted. This really set up a new focus that had a number of impacts. One was the safety became an issue similar to the way removing graffiti in a city really had a lot of cultural impacts on the city itself, as New York City experienced under Giuliani as mayor. Same here. By cutting the grass, cutting the weeds, by having things painted, there's more of a pride taking place, and people become more aware of their surroundings. They watch what's happening. They become aware of what they're doing because they're watching what's happening around them. So safety became really a secondary benefit that happened from the cleanliness itself. Also, by watching and looking at the units themselves, people became more aware of what was happening, what wasn't happening, and many times identified preventative issues such that preventative maintenance was on the increase, and with preventative maintenance there were fewer downtimes. So with a new focus, the whole refinery culture really changed. By focusing on cleanliness, not only was the environment improved, but the safety improved and the operations itself improved. This was a case of the triple bottom line in action at a major refinery. Keep it safe, keep it clean, keep it running. The triple bottom line for really measuring operations, but also the impact that those operational changes had on the culture and the whole environment that people worked within, and that it was safer, it was cleaner, and the profitability went up dramatically. The triple bottom line in action.